starting with Ms. Macallister. Greer Macallister earned her Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from American University. In addition to being a novelist, she's a poet, short story writer, and a playwright. Her debut novel, The Magician's Lie, was a USA Today bestseller, and a Target Book Club selection has been optioned for film. Her new novel, Girl in Disguise, about which we're about to hear, is the story of America's first female private detective. It's been called Well Told, a superb story loaded with suspense and action by Publishers Weekly, and a rip-roaring, fast-paced treat to read. I also think it would make a great mini-series or an HBO show or something like that. I'm sure you would. I didn't think I'd get a lot of pushback on that. As for Mr. Heller, he currently lives in Denver. He was born and raised in New York, attended high school in Vermont, and then Dartmouth College. He received his Master of Fine Arts in Fiction and Poetry at the Iowa Writers Workshop, where he also won a Mishner Fellowship. He is a longtime contributor to NPR and a contributing editor at Outside Magazine, Men's Journal, and National Geographic Adventure. He's an award-winning adventure writer and the author of 4 books of literary nonfiction and 3 novels. His most recent work, Celine, is one of today's featured works. It's been called a fine novel about parents and children and the secrets we try to keep from one another by the New York Times Book Review, and a terrific piece of fiction by Outside Magazine. So with that, please welcome Greer Macallister and Peter Heller.
Neither of us have ever done this without a moderator. It's like, it seems like sort of like, I don't know, no gloves boxing, free for all. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to ask Greer how she came to write her novel, Girl in Disguise, and yeah, how did you get to this book?
Hey, thank you. I got to this book sort of clumsily, which is how I do most of my process and most of my writing. Quickly, thank you all for coming. It's great to see so many people out on a Saturday talking books, loving books, and hopefully buying books. And yeah, so my first book, The Magician's Lie, was historical fiction. It was really the first time that I had tried writing historical fiction. But since then, every idea that I've had has been historical. So I was talking to my editor when The Magician's Lie was done and said, you know, oh, I could write another book about a female magician. Here are the chapters, here's the outline, here's the title, here's the premise, here's the arc. Or I could write a book about the first female private detective. And she said, ooh, write the one about the detective. So I wrote a book about the first female private detective. So Kate Warren was her name, and before I just said it a second ago, how many of you have heard the name Kate Warren? Paul read my book several months ago. I had the opportunity, I spoke to the Louisiana Library Association conference a couple of months ago. So I had a room of 160 librarians. And when you have captive librarians, you want to do something with them. So I asked them, how many of you have heard the name Kate Warren? And librarians know a lot of things. And if they don't know it immediately, they can find it for you. But out of 160 librarians, 5 of them had heard the name Kate Warren. Kate Warren was a real trailblazer. She was the first female detective, and she broke that barrier long before women were allowed to be police detectives. The first female police detectives with a city police force weren't until the 1890s. And then some of you may have read Girl Waits with Gun by Amy Stewart, which is about the first female deputy sheriff in New Jersey, which wasn't until 1930. So it's Kate was way, 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 way ahead of her time, and she marched into Alan Pinkerton's office in 1856 in answer to a newspaper ad for operatives, and the advertisement didn't say only men should apply, because it didn't need to, because it was 1856. But she walked in and said, look, you have male operatives, you have male detectives, they're doing all sorts of great things. They're fighting crime and solving cases and bringing in criminals. And this was in Chicago, so it was full of criminals at that time, and possibly, yes, still today. The police force was even smaller, and none of the criminals had elected office at that time, I think, as some of them later have. Illinois has a real challenge with that. So, but at this time, Alan Pinkerton's detective agency was sort of getting famous as the place to go if you needed real help. And so they had male operatives, she said, they're doing a great job, but what you don't have is a woman who can infiltrate certain circles. I can go into society, I can talk to the wives and girlfriends of the criminals who are always boasting about stuff, and I can help you solve things. And he said, sure. So she became a detective at that time. She helped save Abraham Lincoln's life on his way to his inauguration. There was a plot to kill him in 1861 as he passed through Baltimore the day before his inauguration. And the Pinkertons found out that there was a plot to kill him as he switched trains, so they spirited him through the night before. And Kate Warren was on the train with him during that operation. She was such a good detective that Alan Pinkerton established a bureau of female detectives and put her in charge of it. So she was not only working the front lines, she was a boss. And she also became a spy for the Union during the Civil War. So she did a lot of really cool stuff, and yet we have not heard of her. So I am on a one-woman campaign, and I have a lot of friends who are behind me on this, just to get Kate Warren to be a household name. But part of the reason that we don't know about her is there isn't a lot of material that survives to the present day. So how many of you have heard the name Alan Pinkerton? Okay, so Alan Pinkerton, in addition to having a great story and founding the agency, and the agency still continues today in a different form. It's a security agency now. But people know the Pinkerton name because he wanted them to. He was a really good PR guy. He got his name in the paper. He got his agency in the paper. He wrote books about all the cases they had solved and all the great work they were doing. And so Alan Pinkerton gets to be known because of that. And Kate Warren was too busy working to do that. So I got to go to the Library of Congress to do my research, and it worked out perfectly because I had just moved to DC at the time, and the Library of Congress has the Pinkerton Agency archives. So I'm like, this is perfect. This is a research bonanza. I got my Library of Congress library card, which they give you, and it has your picture on it and everything. Went down to the Library of Congress, got into the archives. They brought out the long list of things and say, how many boxes have this name in them? How many boxes have this name in them? I was done in a few hours with every single mention of Kate Warren in the agency's archives because there just isn't that much. And part of that was, spies and detectives not wanting to have a whole lot of paper talking about what they were doing. And part of it is that the Pinkerton Agency is based in Chicago, and in 1871, the Great Chicago Fire swept through and took a lot of stuff with it, including a lot of the paper records of the agency. So there just isn't that much about Kate Warren, which I would have found super frustrating if I were writing nonfiction. But I am not a historian. I am not a nonfiction writer. I am a novelist. And so this worked out great for me as an opportunity to say, okay, here are these things that happened. Here's where she disguised herself as a medium to find out whether or not was trying to poison somebody's brother. Here is a case that she worked where she found I think it was $50,000 in 1850s money disappeared from a train. Who knows where it disappeared? She found out where it disappeared from. So there were these certain cases that she had worked that I knew about. I knew about the attempted Lincoln assassination. I knew what she did partly during the Civil War, and everything else I got to stitch together and work up. And I read a lot of Alan Pinkerton's books about the types of cases that Pinkerton operatives were working. So I was able to draw from that and make plausible material about what Kate might have been doing then. And then, of course, the research about what it was like to be in Chicago in that period. There's some that takes place in Washington and Richmond and Philadelphia and lots of different places. So I was able to fill in what it was like to be there, if not knowing exactly where Kate was on which day. So that's sort of where Girl in Disguise came from, and how I figured out the real woman at the center of it and turned it into a much larger novel. And I'd like to ask you the question of sort of the woman at the center of your novel, who is also, as I understand it, inspired by a real person.
That is amazing. Wow. Celine is about my mom. My mom died 2.5 years ago, and I was very close with her, and I was sort of devastated, and I wanted to spend an extra year with her, I think, is why I wrote the novel. Mom like Celine, it's interesting hearing about Kate Warren because I feel like Mom in Chicago in 1856 probably would have done the same thing. She grew up in Paris at right before the war. Her dad was a banker named Harry Watkins. He worked for Morgan's, and he was the last guy in the office before the Nazis marched, the Germans marched on Paris. And he sent his 3 daughters, including my mother and his wife, home a couple months before the Germans arrived. And my mom arrived in Manhattan, like Celine, age 7, not being able to speak any English, only French. And all she wanted to do, my grandmother told me, was go back to France and fight in the French resistance. And she was 7 years old. And she used to go around Manhattan listening to people talk, groups of people, and trying to decide who was a Nazi spy. And so she had this sort of like special ops bent, early on. And she grew up. Out of college, she got married, like many women in her generation, pretty fast out of college. And then I came along pretty quickly after, and I kind of squelched her ambitions to be in the CIA, probably. But I'm not actually sure of that. So, but she raised me and my 2 sisters for a little bit, and then she started working for a detective agency in New York. And she worked for a couple of years, and she got her PI license, and almost immediately she was contacted by the FBI. They were trying to catch a guy who had perpetrated a large fraud on the Bank of New York. And they thought the guy was living somewhere in southern Connecticut near his family, but they didn't know where. And they didn't have a special agent that could kind of mingle with a set in Old Greenwich. And somehow they called my mom, and she went up there. Well, she made a couple of phone calls and found the guy in like 2 phone calls. It's like her aunt played tennis with his aunt in Woodstock, Vermont. And so she went up there in her old Volvo. She spied on the guy with her opera glasses. I'm not kidding. It's true. And it was this horse property. Imagine like white rail fences and this big old clapboard house. And the guy came out, got into a sports coupe, and they had a car chase. And she was like in her old Volvo, high-speed car chase all through like Darien. And finally, the guy, he was like, who the hell is this little woman? She could barely see over the steering wheel. He could tell in his like looks in the mirror that she was well coiffed. And he was just so intrigued. He pulled over. She got out. Click, click, click went the pumps on the pavement. She leaned over and she said, Franklin, what you're doing is wrong. It's not good for you. It's not good for your family. And you've got to make this right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to follow you back to your house, and then we'll drive together down to the Bank of New York, and we'll settle this thing. And he did. My mother's sort of moral authority is so persuasive. It's something that, it's inarguable. It's something I ran into a lot as a kid. And that's how she began, her career and she said that hit this guy's face when the special agents put the cuffs on him. She never wanted to see that again because it was so heartbreaking. She kind of felt bad, So she and her husband, Pete, who was her Watson, he's a 7th generation Mainer, and this is all in the book. I left Pete just the way, he is. We call him the quiet American in the family because in Maine, reticence is like the state bird, and nobody says anything up there. And so Pete never really says much, but the 2 of them make this crack investigative team. And as I was growing up, I'll just tell you one more story that I put in the book because I couldn't resist. But as I was growing up, my mom spent a lot of time, she would go away for a few weeks at a time, and nobody really knew what she was doing. And that's why I'm not sure she didn't work for the CIA. She spoke perfect French. She was well-traveled. But the skills she learned on those sojourns would come out in the oddest ways. And once we were saying goodbye to her sister. This is in the beginning of the book, but her sister died up in Idaho by Sun Valley. We went up to say goodbye to her, and we were very sad. She was dying of cancer. And we were driving down the road through Haley, Idaho. We were not saying much. And Mom said, hey, Pete, pull over, will you? And it was this low concrete building, and it said, discount guns. And I said, okay. So she walked in. She's wearing like a silk scarf. Click, 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 go the pumps again. She starts looking at these handguns, and her gold bangles are like clicking on the glass. And this guy behind the counter, he was in coveralls. He'd been like working outside, and he was cleaning a handgun. And he's like watching her. And she said, "Excuse me, could I see that one?" And it was a Navy Colt 45 semi-automatic. I mean, this is like a giant handgun. And the guy said, "It's a gift?" And she said, "No, it's for me." And he said, "Well, you might want to look at these 22s over here. They're a lot lighter, and you might want to start with one of those." And only I would have known that the little eyebrow raise. The guy was skating on thin ice, man. And finally, she said, "No, I'd like to see this one." And he took it out. He handed it to her. He checked it, handed it to her. She took a stance towards the wall. And then it was like I could see this guy's thought bubble over his head, like in a cartoon. It was like, she must watch a lot of cop shows. Pretty good stance. And then he was watching her, and he got so intrigued, just like Franklin. And he said, it's 20-5. I was going to close up anyway in a minute. Let's go shoot this thing. And so we drove up out of Haley, up to this gully. It was a party spot. There was like cans and glasses around, and he set a bunch of cans and bottles on this log, and he was showing her how to rack the 45, and it's going to have a lot of kick, and she was being very polite and everything, and she picked up the gun, and she just went bam, 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 and it was just like cans, glass everywhere, and the last can, I'll never forget, it just landed up against the berm, and she just shot it, and it shot up in the air. And the guy's face, I mean, Norman Rockwell could not have done it justice. You could not characterize. He was just like, and she sat in the front seat going back, I noticed, and he called her Caro instead of Mrs. Heller. I thought that was really sweet. But she was really an amazing, she was a crack investigator, and she and her husband united almost over 100 birth families, which with sealed records, cold cases, some cases 30 years old, and making families whole again. And so that's where this book came from. And I'm so sorry that she couldn't read it, because she'd be so tickled. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I should mention about that. No, let's go on to the next question. I wonder, you were talking about your research and how you got to embellish because there was such a dearth of actual documentation on your character. When you're dealing with a historical character who is actually real, how responsible are you to their posterity? How much can you just make up? How loose and fast can you play it?
I think it's a great question, and I think that sort of every historical novelist finds their own level, and each of us has different challenges. I did an event with Christina Baker Klein, who wrote A Piece of the World about the woman in the painting Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth. And you may not know the name of the painting, but it's the one where there's a woman in a big grass hill twisting up toward a house in the distance. And so the book is about that woman who had letters and diaries, and Andrew Wyeth's family had documented a great deal of stuff. So her challenge was to pare down, here are all the things I could use. What makes the novel? Where do you start it? Where do you end it? And what do you do in between? And mine obviously is a very different challenge of what do I build up from what I have, and do I use everything I have? I mean, I ended up not, I would wait for the train, but who knows how long it's going to be. So I've been an English teacher, a cheerleader, and a tour guide. So I should be able to project my voice, especially with a microphone. Thank you. And then, of course, I forgot where I was. Oh, so Kate's story had to be built up, but it was, it takes place in a real time, in a real place, and there are characters around her who are real. So part of my responsibility is to her, part of my responsibility is the reader to give you something that you enjoy reading, and it's not just a dry recounting of this happened and this happened and this happened. Abraham Lincoln is a character in the book. Alan Pinkerton is a character in the book. She has a lot of other co-workers and operatives around her who are characters. And it takes place starting in 1856 and leading up to the Civil War. And so there's a period that I'm trying to be faithful to and places that I'm trying to be faithful to, in addition to people that I'm trying to be faithful to. So I feel like I need to know enough about all of them to know when I'm changing things. So I have an author's note at the end that says, what I did and didn't change. I changed a few of the details of the Baltimore plot, but most of it is as close to the truth as I can get it. So far, all of the main real characters that I've written about have had no descendants. So Kate died childless, and so there aren't Warrens coming out of the woodwork telling me that I've sullied their grandmother or great-grandmother's memory. But beyond that, I mean, what caught my attention about her is she must have been amazing, like to be that bold. And I gave her the personality I think she must have had in order to do that. So I want her to be a strong character, and she's not flawless. She's not Mary Sue proper, doing everything right and getting everything done. But she's an admirable character, and she's a character that I think is a good role model in her way, despite possibly doing some bad things for good reasons. And so that's one of the questions that the book looks at is it okay to do bad things for good reasons? If you're a spy, you're deceiving people, regardless of whether you're deceiving them for what you believe is a good purpose. So I was sort of looking at that question. And then in terms of the other real characters in the book, I didn't make Abraham Lincoln a jerk. I didn't put bad behavior or bad characteristics into the lives and names of real people unless that was something documented. Because if it is documented, a lot of people weren't big fans of George McClellan, and so he does some things in the book that are consistent with the historical record. So I need to know the record well enough to be faithful to it and to know when I'm diverging from it. But I do also owe the readers a good story. So I know a lot of historical novelists who they'll move things around by a year or two, but you always document it. You always have an author's note. You always have your notes to back you up and say, yes, this song came out in 1868, but I moved it to 1867 for the purposes of the book, because there's no point in making the reader sit around a whole extra year in order to get that song right. And some novelists work it by not putting in certain specifics, but I love the specifics. When I'm a reader, that's what I want. I was reading something the other day that said, somebody's walking down the street in 1928 and heard a popular song. I'm like, well, tell me what that song was. If I'm writing that book, it's very easy to find information. What were the top 10 chart toppers in 1927 or whatever year you're using? And I want that texture, because if I'm reading a book, I want to disappear into that time. I want to be transported to that time. And that's what I want to do for my readers, is transport them to that time. So I'm mixing in facts. Like at this time, Chicago, they were raising the entire city. In Chicago, they have done two major feats of engineering over the years. One is they turned their river around. So the river used to flow out to the lake, and now it flows in from the lake. And I don't even know the specifics, because that didn't take place during this book, and I have to draw the line somewhere. But they were raised, at the time that Kate was working there, they raised the city because they didn't have a sewer system, and they thought they probably should get one, which I fully recommend. But they put hydraulic jacks under the buildings along the river and lifted them up, and then laid down their pipes and laid down dirt, and then just let the building down a little bit on top of it. And to me, it's a historical fact that's fascinating, and then it also speaks to what it was like to be a person in that time of what was possible and what was not possible. So I'm drawing in those things. And I think, it's my responsibility is to both the subjects and the readers. And I'm curious how much you've woven, because obviously a lot of it is fact, but it can't all be fact unless you've just changed the name. So how did you find the story? How did you decide where to start and where to end, and what form the book was going to take?
So I've written 3 novels, and I have, I started out, I wanted to be a fiction writer ever since I was 11. Ever since my librarian in my little library in New York at my school, I had a crush on her. Her name was Annie Bosworth. She was English, and I would have married her for how she said my name. She said, "Peter, are you looking for something to read?" And I was like, "Yes." And a great librarian, like a great bookseller, knows just what you're ready for. And she pulled off In Our Time, that little slim book of stories by Ernest Hemingway. mostly Nick Adams stories up in Michigan. I took it home. You got to imagine a kid in Brooklyn, and I know this is going way back, but you got to imagine a kid in Brooklyn bringing this home, opening it up, and reading about. I mean, I wanted to do that. I wanted to hop off a slow-moving freight train up in Michigan, carry a rucksack, have the grass wetting my pant legs, camp by the Big Two-Hearted River, make cowboy coffee. I didn't know what that was, but it sounded awesome. And I wanted to fish for those beautiful trout the way Nick did, but mostly I wanted to write the way this guy did, because the prose, when you read prose that you just adore, how it doesn't really go through your head, it goes through another organ, kind of, it goes through your skin or straight to your heart, and I wanted to do that. And so I did everything you're supposed to do as a kid, coming up, wanting to be a great writer. I read that Jack London used to put words he didn't know up on his wall, on cards. I did that. I copied out stories and poems because I heard, like Yeats did that. And then I went to a college, and they didn't tell me at the English department that you can't make a living writing poetry or stories. And I thought that was kind of mean of those guys. I mean, they should have told us. So I had to make a living. And so I started writing for magazines. I was a crazy kayaker. I loved kayaking. And so I started writing about kayaking. And I called outside, and I said, hey, I think you should send me on this expedition to Tibet to run this river that's never been run. And I was in my 20s, and they're like, who are you? And I said, well, I can kayak class 5. And I had a story in Harper's, which was sort of true. And but it was on the reading section, this tiny little thing, But they sent me, and a guy died on the first day. In my arms, I was the kayaker, and it was brutal. And I came back, and I said, I can't write your story. I'm sorry. And they said, what happened? And I vented. I know I was traumatized. And they said, you go write that. And that was like a big feature. And and it was a weird way to start in journalism. But it began this career of being like joyfully diverted from what I wanted to do since I was a little kid. I'd wanted to write novels. And I was having so much fun, paddling around the world and going on expeditions. And then I began doing more and more environmental stories because I could see the ecosphere was unraveling. And, it was so wonderful and fun that I kind of forgot. I didn't forget, but I couldn't. It was like golden handcuffs, kind of, or like neoprene handcuffs. And so anyway, a few years ago when I sat down to write fiction, I did not want to know what was going to happen because I had written these books that came out of these magazine articles. I always knew what was going to happen next. I always knew what the ending was going to be because it happened. And so I didn't want to plot. I didn't want to outline. I didn't want to have a map with pins in it. I wanted to start with a first line and just let it rip. And I didn't know if that was legal. And, like, would the fiction police just, like, bust down the door if you did that? I called my buddy, my best friend in high school, Carlton Hughes, and he was the producer of Lost and the show writer for the show Lost. And I called him. I said, hey, do you know anybody who just starts with a first line and lets it rip? And he didn't bat an eye. He said, yes, Stephen King. I've worked with him. Stephen King often starts with the first line. It's a voice. The voice is a character. The character's in a place. There's a situation because there's always a situation, and he writes into the story. And then he said something that really surprised me. He said, Elmore Leonard, I worked with him. Get Shorty, all those crime novels in South Florida. He often just starts in and has no clue. And so it kind of gave me permission. I did that. I did that for my first 2 novels. And with Celine, I didn't even know I was going to write about my mom. I was like I was stricken with grief. I started with the first line. And it was, what happens in this book is that there's a young woman, Gabriella, whose father went missing near Yellowstone over 20 years before, and he was apparently mauled by a bear. It was ruled a bear attack, a killing, but the body was never found, and she thinks that the evidence is fishy. And she had read about Celine in an alumni magazine story, and so she said that she was great at solving cold cases, so she calls her. And I began this novel with the first line. I just began with the music of the language. I mean, that's what interests me because I wrote so much poetry coming up. So I began with a line something like, my mother's name was Amana Ambrosio. In Tupi Warani, Amana means night rain. And I loved the sound of it, and that was Gabriella beginning to tell her story. Her mother was Brazilian. And before you knew it, a few pages in, or a chapter in, this young woman was calling Celine and asking for help to find her father. And then I realized Celine was my mother, and then I spent a year writing about my mom. But it wasn't planned at all. And so, as these stories came up, these family stories, I just put them in. I didn't even think about it. And I didn't think about offending anybody. Probably should have. But there's a great, the disclaimers at front of books are really magical things. I mean, I think in front of this one, it just says a lot of Celine's family history is true, but some of it's made up. Keeps everybody on their toes, like none of my cousins can now sue me, which is sort of awesome. But I did send it around to the family. I sent it to cousins, and I sent it to Pete, who is Mom's husband, and he is exactly as written in the book. I didn't even change his last name. And I sent it to him in manuscript, and I'll just tell this before I finish, but I sent it to him 2 days later. Remember, 7th generation island Mainer. I mean, coastal Mainers are one breed, but island Mainers are a whole different deal. I mean, they're basically like walking blocks of granite in terms of, how they look at the world. And I get a call 2 days later, and it was Pete. He said, I read the book. Okay, well, what'd you think? I have 2 criticisms. I sat up, when he said something like that. He said, your mother would have never gone out to meet that assassin, when she had the Glock under her robe at the campsite with her cup of coffee. She would have never gone out without putting on full face. And I was like, okay, I can fix that. I had just had her put on a little lipstick, And then he said, and she never took my arm. We always held hands. I was like, okay, I'll fix it. That was a long answer. So let's talk about, what should we talk about? What would be really fun?
I had a really interesting question the other night that I had never been asked before, so
let's ask it.
I'm going to spring it on you and see.
No, I just talked for a long time. What's the question?
Well, the question is, what do you think makes a great story?
Greer. What do you think makes a great story?
It's funny you should ask that. I've given this some thought in the 5 minutes after it was asked the other night. So for me, a story is great if you want to find out what happens. And a lot of people talk about formulas and how you make the reader keep turning pages. And there's some synthesis of plot and character and language. And I love what you said about poetry and the attention to words, because I did some poetry in grad school as well. And it gives you that laser focus on the way that words sound next to each other, the rhythm of the sentences and how it flows. But you can have an entire book full of pretty sentences in it nobody wants to read. I think I've written a few of those before I started writing the ones that got published. But a great story, you don't have to like the characters. You don't have to, have a great, happy, wonderful person at the center of your book. But you want people to care. You want them on some level to forget that these people are not real, or in this case, that some of the people are real, but they've been synthesized into a fictional story. And with my first book, which was about a magician, I got to talk a lot and think about the similarities between fiction and stage magic, which is illusionists are there to fool you, and as fiction writers, so are we. And as the audience of a magic show, you have agreed to be fooled. And if you pick up a novel, you have agreed that you are going to read something that didn't happen. And none of these people, why should you care about these people? And we make you care about these people if we're doing our job. So for me, that's the power of story. If a story is good and it makes you just disappear into this world and into the lives of these people, that's what I want as a reader, and that's what I'm hopefully doing as a writer.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I learned to tell stories around the dining room table and around campfires. And some of the greatest storytellers I've ever heard or read were people telling stories, around a campfire. And I think I learned a lot from those people. But I always think of it like, have you guys? How many people here have picked up a rescue dog from a shelter? Oh, wow. You guys in Maryland are awesome. So when you pick up the dog and you put the dog in the car, what's it like? It's it's probably nervous, anxious. It might be trembling, and it's kind of looking at you, and it wants so badly to trust you, and to love you, and to go with you, but it's not sure. And I think that your readers are like that. In a way. I mean, they agree to be fooled, but they're not, they're no fools. It's sort of like fool me twice, right? I mean, they've all read bad books. And so you take the dog home and what? You give it food and water and, a little nice little mat, by the fireplace that says, Jasper. And you give it a sense of a home, which is a sense of place. And then when you whistle and say, saddle up, and you get in your car, then what? The dog jumps in the car that it didn't really want to get into. It jumps in the car, and now you can take that car across the country, and you could do Travels with Charlie, right? That dog just wants to go with you. And I think the reader's the same way. It's like, if you give a reader a home with a sense of place, that's what I've found. It's like, the most important element for me is to give a reader a sense of place that they can immerse themselves in. And the way you do it is, I found with sense data, right? I use as many of the 10 senses. I know there's more than 5. Use as many of the senses as I can in the beginning, because people trust their senses more than the think stuff. And give them a sense of place so that they feel like they're immersed, and then you can kind of take their hand and lead them into a story, and usually the reader will follow. But then there's so many other elements to keep them there, and I don't know, I'm not exactly sure how that works. I could list them, if this was a college class, but when we're writing, I don't know about you, but when I'm writing, I just sort of follow my nose, and I know when it's getting slow. I know when there's too much backstory. I know when there's too much exposition. And I know when it's time for someone to die, or a gunshot, or an argument, or some spark that will keep things galloping along. Yeah, it is kind of like magic, isn't it? Huh? I never felt so cheap.
Neither of us is David Blaine. We're not that kind of magic. We're a whole different kind of more graceful magic. I think it's probably time for us to do. I think we're both going to do just a quick. Do you want to do a quick reading before we do the questions, or you want to just jump into questions?
You all buy the book. You don't gotta read. We got 10 minutes. Let's do questions. Is that good?
Sure.
Yeah, that's the funnest part. I think. Don't be shy. Yeah.
Interested in, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, in reading both of your books. So thank you for sharing. I love the insight and background, but to be honest, historical fiction is not the genre I would be top of my list.
It is now.
Yeah. but I did read not too long ago Stephen King. You mentioned Stephen King, 11/22/63, which I found was a real page turner. Even I guess knowing there's a lot of conjecture of what conversations truly happened with Oswald and things that obviously he couldn't have known, but he's just trying to make a good story and draw you in. So, what other authors or stories have you read recently or inspired you in your own writing? That would help us kind of understand your influences and background.
Mm-hmm.
I'll sort of jump in. So I had to do this recently. I was asked my top 5 authors by Shelf Awareness, and I said, well, right now I have top 5 books by Margaret Atwood. So how about I do that instead? Because I love Margaret Atwood so much, and I venerate and honor and have envy for her for a number of reasons. One of which is that she can basically write whatever she wants. People tell you sometimes, oh, you have to brand yourself and you have to stay within a certain box so that the reader knows that you're going to give them a certain thing. She's writing poetry, she's writing sci-fi basically, she's writing historical fiction, and she does a lot of wonderful things. Her book Alias Grace was a heavy influence on my first book, The Magician's Lie. And I just, the worlds that she draws are not always pleasant, but I feel like she has a beautiful balance of characters that you care about, plot, sort of that idea that something does need to happen. There are books in which nothing does, but they're not her books. And the language also, beautifully written sentences in service of plot and character. So if I could do that, that's what I'm aiming for anyway.
Huh. That's cool. So I have like two different kinds of books that I just love. I almost exclusively read fiction, and I love the people that write with that are lyrical writers. I love Faulkner for that reason. He's such a lyrical writer. I love Cormac McCarthy. I hated The Road because it was so bleak, even though I ended up writing a post-apocalyptic novel myself. But I also love the music and the language in The Road. I mean, I think Cormac McCarthy is a very musical writer. So people who are lyrical are people I love, and then people who take you into really surreal places. And so I love a bunch of the Latin American writers. There's a guy named Ira who's like in his 70s who's written like 100 novels, and they're crazy. I mean, they're about like expeditions in the 1800s that go into the Pampas in Argentina looking for a magical hare that can fly, and all the Mapuche Indians speak in Hegelian dialectics. I mean, it's like he's crazy, and I love those kind of books that are so bold, the way Calvino was, and Borges, and Murakami does that too, the Japanese novelist. He'll be going along, his character doesn't expect much of the world. And I love fiction where characters wake up and they're just not expecting much of their day. I love that. People and I think that's why we like noir, like Scandinavian noir and those TV shows like Wallander and stuff. Because, I mean, they wake up and they're just so depressed. They don't shave, they have bad hygiene, they're divorced, they drink too much, nothing good's going to happen today, and then something, really wild happens. And that's sort of what happens in Murakami novels. So I really, really love those too.
Okay, more questions, please.
How do you, excuse me, how important is it that other writers to connect with in your process and as you've grown in your career, connecting with other writers?
It's very, very important. I live partly the reason I live in Denver. I mean, if I didn't have a little writers community in Denver, I'd probably live in a cabin way in the woods and, send anthrax to politicians.
It's a fine Western tradition.
It's a Western tradition, that's right. But no, I mean, seriously, it's really, really important to have a few first readers. I have two. I have my wife, who's not a literary person, but is a crack intuitive first reader who knows just where so I read out loud to her. As I'm writing, I read blocks of the story out loud to her, and if she starts to fall asleep and says, "Too much fishing," then I know to cut it. But she knows. And then I have two author friends who I give the manuscript to, and they're very, very excellent, smart readers. So by the time it gets to my agent, it's been really well edited in a way and vetted, and I find it to be super important and also inspiring that these people they're very hard workers. They treat it as a craft. They work really hard every single day. They might take one day off a week, and I find that that keeps me motivated. So yeah, I think it's really, really. Yeah.
And I would agree that it's really, really helpful, both from a craft perspective. I was in a critique group in New York before I moved back to DC, and we wrote all different genres. There was somebody writing, Master and Commander style nautical fiction. There was a guy writing sci-fi. There was a guy writing a Korean War novel. There was a woman writing supernatural romance where like a shape-shifting cat falls in love with a shape-shifting dog or something like that. And it was great. And a woman who works in a lingerie store, and we were across all genres, and so we weren't writing the same, but we had the same concerns. You could read somebody else's stuff and say, either I would keep reading this or I wouldn't. And that's incredibly helpful from a craft perspective, just to have beta readers and to have other people who can sort of help you gut check and say, yes, this book is going in the right direction, or maybe the book you want to write, this is what it feels like, might be the book you want to write, but yeah, I wouldn't want to read it. So you need both their input and your own sense, your own strong sense of whether or not to accept those critiques. And you develop that over time, for sure. So from a craft perspective, I think it's important. And just from a company perspective, I find it really heartening. I have a strong online support network. Through social media, through Twitter and Facebook and everything else, and just knowing that other people are going through the same things that you're going through, when you're like, oh my gosh, I wrote this book a year ago and now it's coming out. What do I do? How do I reconnect with it? Is it normal for XYZ? The answer is it's always normal for XYZ, because everybody's got a different process, and bad things happen, good things happen. you have the most amazing luck, you have the most terrible luck, and it's good to have other authors to talk about that with, because otherwise you'll drive your family crazy. Is they don't want to hear the detail of, whether or not you get picked as a book club selection. But it's great to know other writers at every part of the process. I've found before and after publication, because it's a crazy business and you need company.
And to add to that, I think we have time for one more question. You were very eager, but I should just add that when someone gives you criticism, if there are writers in here, it's really an honor. Anytime anyone gives me criticism, I think this is someone who's, this is billions of years of evolution to get that brain, and they put their life energy and their brain energy on your work and their attention, and they have something to say about it. It's a real honor. So no matter what the criticism is, I always take it as a gift. So anyway, one more question, I think.
Writing's not a 9-to-5 job or a Monday through Friday job. So kind of how do you go through your creative process, but also do it as a job?
Interesting. A lot of writers have other jobs also, and so in my case, I do have a 9-to-5 job in addition to the writing job, which is why I only have a book every couple of years. But different people do it in different ways. A lot of people impose discipline and say, I'm going to write it in the same place every day, at the same time every day. And some people go as the spirit moves them. And I think whatever works for you is the appropriate process. I do think you want to try to bring some rigor to it and experiment with same time every day or same sort of environment. The book that I'm writing right now, I played sections of my audiobook to get myself in the same mood, and you try different things and you work with what works for you, but you should never feel if you're not doing somebody else's process that you're doing it wrong, because you're not. You have to do what works for you.
Right. I write 1,000 words a day every day, but I always stop in the middle. I don't let myself go way past 1,000 and write through a scene, because that's a transition. It's white space. You might as well start the book every day. It's changed my life, and I've all my author friends do that now. It's like write whatever your quote is, but stop in the middle. Don't go past your quote and stop in the middle. Don't stop at the end of a scene. And I just want to close with one little story, which is valuable for writers. I think it's so cool. When I was in the middle of, I'd written the Dog Stars, and that was sort of like a just a channeling. It felt like it felt like that. 7 months, boom, out. And I didn't think. I was like, don't think, just listen. This guy's talking, he's telling his story, just write it down. The painter, I started to think about everything, and I was like, wow, this isn't good. I'm thinking. The other one worked out, and I wasn't thinking. I'm thinking about where it should happen. And I was in a little coffee shop, and it's a tiny little coffee shop with a table in the middle about this size, and you're going to meet anyone who's in there. And Paolo Bacigalupi is in there, the great science fiction writer. He's written Hugo Award-winning books, and he's big books. I was telling him my quandary, and he said, he's younger than me, but he said, sit down, son. And he said, let me tell you a story. And this is really fast. But he said, I wrote one story, felt like fugue state. I woke up, it was done. I sent it in. It won an award, and I love it. Second story, I engineered the whole thing, plotted every second, designed the characters, totally controlled, sent it in, and it won a big award, and I love it. Now I hold them up both, and I look at them, and I love them both, and I can't tell the difference. And he leaned forward, and he said, your job is just to make sure it doesn't suck. And it was like, wow, I think I can do that. And it was the whole creative burden lifted off. It was great to have you guys. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.